Hello, my name is Father Wickens, and I'm from St. Anthony of Padua Chapel in West Orange, and we're here to bring over to you Catholic teaching, Catholic truth. As we've said before in some of our other programs, the role of the Catholic priest is to be a vehicle or a conduit of divine revelation. See, God has revealed to the human race what things we must believe and what morals we must obey. God has revealed them to us. He revealed them to the apostles through the Holy Scriptures and through tradition. That is, those truths not contained specifically in the Scriptures. Official tradition, not unofficial tradition. And the job of the Church, the Catholic Church, and of course the priests in the Church, is to take this deposit of faith, this sum total of the doctrines and the morals, and to pass them on down through generations to generations. So we're at St. Anthony of Padua Chapel in West Orange, and later on at the end of this program you'll see the address of the chapel and the time of the Masses and the phone number. So if you'd like to call us or come to one of our Masses on Sunday, we'd be glad to see you. Now, we do have the traditional Latin Mass. Why don't we have the new Mass? Well, we have the new Mass because the traditional Latin Mass is the faith of our fathers. It's the Mass of 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago. And why is it in Latin? It's in Latin because the meaning of the prayers do not change from year to year sometimes, and certainly generation to generation. The meaning of words change over a period of time. Even the English language, you know that yourself, that a certain terminology that was current, let's say in the 40s or 50s, is no longer current, and the meaning has changed. And matter of fact, I'll give you a little simple example of that. If you saw, if somebody went up on the stage, let's say a teenager, and he sang, and they asked one of them, how was that singing? It was bad. Meaning it was good. So it was just the opposite of the original meaning of the word, good or bad. Anyway, lawyers, doctors, legal profession, medical knows, the pharmaceutical, botanical profession know that Latin words are best when you want to preserve exactitude and unchangeableness in the meaning of a concept, you see. So lawyers use Latin phrases, and they can use them all over the world. They can use them 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years. They meant the same thing. And you can go to Europe or South America or Asia, and these terms will mean the same thing, like habeas corpus, for example, or many other legal terms. So the Catholic Church preserves the essential prayers, the unchanging prayers of the Mass in Latin, so that you can say these prayers any place in the world, or any era, or any generation. They will mean exactly the same thing. We have to preserve these doctrines that Christ has given us, and Latin is one way of doing that. Now, people object and they say, well, I don't understand Latin, it's not my language. Well, a good parallel that we've often mentioned is that it's like going to the opera to a certain extent. You get a libretto, and on one side of the page is the Italian or French or German, whatever the opera happens to be, and the other side is the English. You can follow either way, but majority of people, probably 90%, follow in their own language, but some would follow in the original language. And you don't really want those things to be translated. They would certainly lose a lot of their meaning and a lot of their beauty. And there would be a lot lost, there's no question about that. So, and of course, everything's not in Latin. The readings are in what we call the gospel and the epistle. They're read in the vernacular. Also, the prayers at the end of Mass are in the vernacular. Hail, Holy Queen, and of course we say the Rosary in English, and so there's really no objection that this is not my language. As a matter of fact, there's so many pluses of maintaining the Latin that they far outweigh any minuses. If there are any minuses at all, I don't think there are any, to tell you the truth. Because a good Catholic person comes to the Mass and has a missal, similar to something here that I'm holding in my hand. And matter of fact, all of the changeable parts of the Mass are in English in here. The epistle, gospel, the gradual, the communion prayer, the post-communion prayer. But what we call the canon of the Mass, and that is the part that remains unchanged, remains in Latin. Anyway, that's just a little preface about our traditional chapel. So, and when people come, women wear head coverings, and people genuflect, and we keep quiet in church unless we have a real good reason. And so there's, in other words, the church is not a playground. The church is not a place to socialize. The church is where we look up together, everyone. We look up at the crucifix and the tabernacle with the priest. We all look that way, and we worship God. You know, there's a house called the House of Loretto, which tradition has that Mary, the Blessed Mother, lived and died in this house. And this house was miraculously transformed to Italy in Loretto, and the people built a shrine about this house where our Blessed Mother lived. And in this house, there's an altar where St. John offered Mass. And the shrine, this altar is facing the wall where the crucifix is. And that's the way St. John offered Mass, and the Blessed Mother was behind him. See? So the Blessed Mother is behind him, and St. John, all together. Remember, we're all God's creatures. We're all worshiping God together. Like when priests say, well, I like to face the people. Well, that's not really the way it was in the early church. And it also tends to be theologically inferior, because it tends to notice things that are not necessary. That the priest's, his looks, his expressions, they're really secondary. Because then the whole worship becomes God, instead of God-centered, becomes man-centered. All right, but I want to move along on this. Sometimes we get off on these subjects of the traditional Mass, because it's not only a question of liking it or preferring it, but also it's theologically sound, and there's a lot of graces from the traditional Mass. So if you're having a problem with your family, your children, their grandchildren, whatever, bring them to Mass. Bring them to the traditional Mass. The graces will come off that altar. You can talk to your blue in the face, about not having enough faith and not having enough good behavior, being selfish. And you talk to your children, you talk to your grandchildren, and nothing happens. Oh, maybe they have a little bit of attention here and there, but basically they're not imitating the saints. They're not following in the footsteps of their Catholic parents and grandparents. But what do you do with them? You pray for them. But also, take them by the ear, literally or figuratively, and bring them to the traditional Mass. Let them kneel down. Let them look up at the crucifix. Let them see the gallery of saints and the example of the saints. And the graces of the altar will come off on them. And they're bound to be touched and influenced by that. I've seen some wonderful things with young people once they come back to the traditional Mass. Wonderful things. And conversions, not spectacular, overnight, but little by little. The example of our Savior, Jesus Christ, who was pure, and he was zealous for God's glory, and Jesus Christ was prayerful and apostolic, and also he gave the example of living with his parents in Nazareth under obedience and docility. And this will gradually affect the children and grandchildren, unless they're very hard-hearted. I mean, God does not get inside of anybody and destroy their free will, but if they have any amount of willingness, and they keep an open mind and an open heart, then the graces will pour in, and you'll see a transformation. So we pull our hair out and we worry about this and that, and the kids of today, Bring them back to the font of grace. Bring them back to the foot of the crucifix. Bring them back in front of the altar rail and the tabernacle and the traditional Latin Mass. And let them see the saints, St. Anthony and St. Joseph and the Blessed Mother and St. Philomena and St. Therese, the Little Flower. And let them imitate those great saints instead of imitating Michael Jackson or Madonna or these various movie stars who they respect. And even some of these athletic performers who give very, very bad example. So let them have heroes who are worth imitating, and that would be the great saints in the Catholic Church. And I just mentioned a few of them. Mother Cabrini's another one, and these the Saint Agnes and all the apostles and all these great saints. So we belong to St. Anthony of Padua Chapel on Pleasant Valley Way in West Orange, and we hope to see you there. What we've been doing is we've been doing the commandments. We've been going through the commandments. We pretty much covered the fifth commandment. I just wanted to, the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill. I have a little catechism here. Catechism, of course, is a summary of Catholic teachings. It's not exhaustive. It's an outline, you might say. And when the priest gives convert instructions, or give instructions to the people, you know, we expound on this outline here. But the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill, we already talked about fighting and quarreling, injurious words, and of course homicide, murder, you know, and we've talked about capital punishment, and also, which is permissible because it's self-defense, and also as far as a just war is not only permissible, but it's virtuous. The great saints in the Catholic Church went to war. Joan of Arc, St. Venantius, and the great battle of Lepanto, which was a naval battle in which the Turkish fleet was defeated. Fortunately, their goal was to capture practically all of civilization, certainly Christian civilization, and in a momentous battle, naval battle, they were defeated, and the tide of conquest was reversed. And that was due to these heroic men who went on the ships and prayed the rosary and asked God to be their guide. And so lots of times people like to denigrate. You know, it's that liberal press that does that all the time. They're always knocking the military, trying to find faults, and it actually is very disturbing that they do that. I mean, do these liberals have any idea what the world would be like if our American boys did not go over to Germany, did not go to North Africa, World War II? Do you realize what kind of a world we would be in if they didn't go over to Vietnam and stop the tide of communism spreading in Southeast Asia, in Korea and Vietnam? We would have a complete communist-dominated Southeast Asia, and eventually they would have taken over Australia and who knows what else. Our boys went over there and they put their life on the line, and I give them tremendous credit. Some never returned. Some came back wounded, and others did come back. And they should receive as many veterans benefits as you can possibly give them. And we could never repay them how they've been our blue line of defense for the free world. If it wasn't for the citadel of democracy and strength that the America has shown, the whole world would now be enslaved. We'd be under tyrants, whether it's Adolf Hitler or Joe Stalin or Mao Zedong or any one of these, Saddam Hussein, whoever the latest tyrant is, who would remain unchecked except for the military might and commitment of our government to hold back these godless, tyrannical forces that want to overthrow and enslave people. So we should be very grateful to our veterans. Fifth commandment also forbids, besides homicide, forbids hatred and revenge, and also bad example and scandal. Let me mention a little bit about that. In this little catechism, it says, how can we be answerable for the sins of others? We can give them bad example and scandal. You know, Jesus Christ said it's better for you, if you're gonna scandalize these little ones, it's better if you had a millstone around your neck and thrown into the sea. It's better that you die than you would give scandal to these little ones. Scandal means where you lead someone into sin by your bad example. See? In other words, they see you, let's say, suppose, in a family, the father comes home and he's intoxicated, right? Or the children see that. I mean, really intoxicated. And they see that. And they see the effects of that, because sometimes when you're intoxicated, you do things that are irrational and immoral, like knock around his wife or the kids unnecessarily, or waste a lot of money, and makes a strained budget even more strained already. So the kids see that, you know, and they don't like it. They don't like to see that. But ironically, when the kids get older, somehow or other they remember, and drinking isn't all that bad, because after all, their father drank to excess, you know. And I've seen it happen many times, a situation like that, where when the kids are small, they'll say, wow, boy, Daddy came home, he was angry, and we had to hide under the table, and he was throwing things around, and he was cursing, and this and that, and boy, that's terrible. And then later on, when these kids are in their 20s and 30s, heavy drinkers, and some of them have history repeat itself, you know. A bad example. Here's ways how this catechism explains different ways we may cause or share in another's guilt. See, this would come under the fifth commandment, because thou shalt not kill refers not only to killing someone's body, but also their soul and their mind. You see, well, the soul and mind are really synonymous. By counsel, this is how you can cooperate with others. You counsel them. You say, why don't you do this sin? By command, you tell them to commit a sin. Remember in Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist, and this man would all get these orphan boys, these waifs, and he would command them to go out and steal and to bring the stuff back, you know. So those boys were responsible for stealing. But the guy, was it Fagin? Was that his name? I forget. In the Dickens novel, F-A-G-I-N. He commanded them to go out. Otherwise, he would give them a beating or deprive them of food or a place to stay, you see. So this man who commanded them would be responsible. By consent, that's another way we cooperate. Someone else is doing something immoral, and we consent and we agree with them. By praise or flattery. In other words, we think it's funny when they do something immoral. When the guy runs around with somebody else other than his wife, we think it's funny and we flatter him, and wow, you're really a man. And that's another way we can commit sin ourselves and cooperate in someone else's sin. By concealment. Sometimes a person's faults are so grave and they affect the public good that we must reveal these to competent people. Now, you don't go around gossiping for any old reason. But someone who has a right to know, like let's say, suppose there was a girl engaged to a seemingly nice guy, but this guy was a secret drug addict, right? He was hooked on drugs. And this nice girl who wanted to get married met this guy, and on all appearances the guy seemed to be fine, but he had this deep, dark secret as a drug addict. And you knew about the drug addiction. You have an obligation to tell that girl. Now, she can make the decision any way she wants. But to reveal a serious fault to someone who's going to be affected by that serious fault, you would have an obligation to do that, you see. Another way, by being a partner in sin, where, let's say a guy holds up a bank, and somebody goes inside with the gun, but someone drives the car. They're all responsible. Okay? The guy driving the car is as responsible as the guy with the gun, because he's being a partner in this sin, in this crime, you see. And that can happen with a lot of different types of sins and crimes, or a partner. By silence, okay, that's another way we cooperate in the sin of another's, by silence. Like parents, you have this all the time. Your children do something that's, you know, is immoral, it's not right. Let's say your daughter is living outside of the sacrament with somebody, which happens, unfortunately, either actually cohabitating with that person or they're having an immoral liaison with that person. And you know about it. Well, it would be wrong for you to keep silence. I don't mean you have to mention it every day or every hour of every day, but you certainly have an obligation to prudently express your disapproval of that because it offends God. And that's why these things are wrong, not because of society or anything like that. I remember a story I heard on radio one time during the riots in Los Angeles. I think it was some years ago. And on the television they had looting, people running in stores and grabbing televisions and VCRs and other electronic equipment. They were looting stores. They just took the advantage of this atmosphere of lawlessness, and they decided to steal. And so this man, he's a Jewish man, he said to his son, they practiced their Jewish faith, and he said to his son, as they were watching on television, he said, would you go in a store like that in a time like this and steal and take things, even though you knew you would not get caught? Because so many people doing it, there's so few police, and there was kind of an unrest going on. He said to his son, would you go in there and steal, knowing something you really want, you know, maybe some kind of a radio or or a computer? And the son said, no, Dad, I would not do that. I would not do that. And the father said, why wouldn't you do that? You would not get caught. He says, because it's against the commandments of God. Thou shalt not steal. See? I mean, that's why, you know, people try to isolate behavior from religion, that God is the ultimate lawgiver. It's not just because people are puritanical or people are narrow-minded. Because there's a law of God. I mean, God made us. He made us to know Him, love Him, and serve Him in this world and be happy with Him forever in the next. God is our beginning and our end. I mean, there was a time where you and I did not exist. And out of nothing, God created us. Yes, He used the instrumentality of your parents and my parents, but God really did create us. He said, let there be life. There's a great painting in the Vatican of our Lord creating Adam. And if you can picture it, here's a picture of God, and God the Father, and His finger is pointing out, and then there's a man on the other end whose finger is touching His, and that's Adam. It's like God is saying, let there be life. I'm going to create you, Adam, out of nothing, you see. And he was our first parent, Adam. Of course, he did not come into this world through any human instrumentality. God directed him. God directed and created Adam directly. And so God is our supreme being. He's the supreme being. He's the beginning and end. And He gives us the commandments, and we're doing the fifth commandment, which is thou shalt not kill. And we're talking about ways in which you can help kill a person's soul by counsel, command, consent, provocation, praise or flattery, concealment, being a partner in sin by silence, and by defending the ill done. You know, I've seen that happen lots of times. Like some guy will be married, and I don't want to always blame the gal. Sometimes it's the guy or the gals. It used to be the guy was mostly at fault, but that's not true anymore. I'd say it's 50-50. And the, you know, a gal get married, and after a year or two, and she may or may not have a baby, and after a year or two, she's bitten by the feminist bug, and she doesn't want to be home anymore. Wants to go back to school, and then gets in with different friends, and then pretty soon she doesn't want to be home. She stays out overnight, and she spends more time with her girlfriends or a health club. And so she neglects her husband and she neglects her children. And not only that, she's leading towards a lot of trouble. Because once you leave the home and you start putting emphasis upon your body and leave the protective environment of your home, there's a lot of temptation out there. So let's say, suppose this particular gal, I'll just say gal, it could be a guy, and this particular gal does that. So it's, oh, you defend it, you know. You defend the ill done. Well, suppose she picks up with another guy too. Well, she was lonely. After all, her husband was not you know, Clark Gable, and he wasn't Cary Grant, all wrapped in one, and using some old-time movie actors. And after all, you know, like, she'll defend it. See, wherever you live, whatever your circumstances are, none of these things excuse immoral behavior. They don't excuse it. Yeah, there's factors and all that, of course, but we have to keep God's law regardless. And we can do it if we pray and go to traditional Mass, go to confession, receive Holy Communion. So I'm going to get back to this before we close, that we have a traditional Mass in West Orange, and we complain and we worry about our children, and you good parents out there, you mothers and fathers and grandmothers, you worry about your young people who are committed to your care, whom you love, whose blood is your blood and your bone is your bone. You worry about them, okay? So you take them to the doctor, you take them to the dentist, but because of their body and their hygiene, take them to Mass. Take them to a traditional Mass so that they can be receive the best possible attention from God and from His graces. So until next time, I will sign off now. This is Father Wickens at St. Anthony of Padua saying, God bless you, benedictio Dei omnipotentis Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti descenda super vos et manet semper. Amen.